Well, I will get started. Welcome everyone to our first event for the Women Who Design in collaboration with the AIA, the Women in Architecture Committee of the AIA Silicon Valley. So Mani, if you want to go to the next slide. My name is Lauren and I am in charge of the marketing for the Women Who Design. And we are planning a big virtual exhibit. Our event is called Life Cycles of Women in Architecture, and we'll have exhibit workshops and discussion groups. So Mani, if you want to go to the next slide. We've had interest from all over the world, which is really exciting. Last year, we sent out a call to artists around the life cycles of women in architecture, and then the COVID-19 pandemic happened and we had to readjust. So now we're doing everything virtually, and we had a great turnout of people. So this map kind of shows just everywhere where we got some feedback. Mani, if you want to go to the next slide. We'll be having 3 virtual events before the launch of our exhibit. This is our first virtual event, and we'll have one next Sunday called Today's Dilemma, which an artist will take us through her illustrations and then show you how to do it, so you'll have your own. And then our third event will be the collective Memory of Diverse Women Architects. It'll be a discussion panel with several people. And the panel will explore how to talk about women and place them in history, and not just the Starchitect, but the average, female architects. So all the events are open to everyone, and if you're interested, we'd love it if you join. And then we'd love it if you saw our exhibit when it launches later in May. So that is all I have today for you, and I will give it back over to Mani.
Thank you. So, hi everyone. My name is Dasha Ortenberg. I'm the chair of the Women in Architecture Committee of the AIA Silicon Valley, and we're thrilled to be participating in this event with Women Who Design. The presenters today are all leading members of our committee who have innovated and inspired us over the past 5 years that the committee has existed in its current form in our chapter. It was founded 5 years ago on the heels of the first FAIA, which is a fellow of the American Institute of Architects, woman in our chapter, who was Pamela Anderson Brule, and with the goal of stimulating women's growth in the profession through sustained activities that provide mentorship and network opportunities to enable women in architecture to reach their full potential. So we're thrilled that even in our 5-year existence, we have advanced women incredibly through this network. Many of us have found new roles and really investigated our identities and advanced our professional tracks in tandem with who we are as human beings, which is a really incredible thing to find. And we've found each other as inspiring resources, and we hope that we can share some of that story with you today. So if you could go to the next slide, please. We have an annual series of events every year, and we also do larger events. So a couple of events that are coming up in the coming months are intersections. So we have an intersection series that we're working on with the local community college districts to demonstrate different things that you can accomplish as an architect who's interested in the community, and different ways to become a practicing architect if you're coming from diverse backgrounds and might not see a path forward for yourself. So our event coming up on April 28th is a pathway for equity in design, where Cordine Lewis-Allen, who is a designer and educator in New York, will be speaking to how to launch a community organization in your neighborhood to impact, to advance your own neighborhood through your work. We're also working on the Architectural Intelligence Conference, which is a 3-track conference focusing on sustainability, equity, and inspiration, coming up in September of this year. And then we are so thrilled to announce this recently publicly available information that we will be hosting the National Women's Leadership Summit for the entire American Institute of Architects in the country, here in Silicon Valley, in San Jose, and we're working on that. So it's very, very exciting recent news. So just to get us started, the 3 panelists today are all either founding or early members of our committee. Katya McLean is the Northern California Managing Principal of Steinberg Hart. She is involved with the Downtown San Jose Association and leads complex projects and has been doing so for many decades. You'll hear more about her story in her own presentation, so I'm not gonna take up too much airtime by retelling it myself. Mani Adalan Farhadi is currently a senior facilities planner at Stanford University. She has also decades of architectural planning and design experience at various firms across the Bay Area and across the country. And she is also a leader in advocacy events on intersectional identities. Mariana Alvarez Parga is a principal at MADI 196, as well as an achiever, learner, and strategist. She presents frequently with the WIA on various topics, all of which provide incredible insight for people developing their careers in different ways, coming from diverse backgrounds. So I'm thrilled that these 3 women who have inspired me and inspired our committee and our chapter for over half a decade now, are here to help you also see different ways to advance your career through maintaining your network. Next slide, please. So today's workshop has been approved as a course through the AIA. The learning objectives are to analyze examples of barriers that minorities face in the design profession and translate that awareness into an empathetic practice. Identify techniques to determine how your practice style can have a positive impact in the design profession and for the public. Explore the advantage of expanding connections and professional circles to advance minority groups in design, and create a pathway to advancement through storytelling and networking, and to sustain your growth through personal and professional advocacy. Today, we'll be using Miro to collect our thoughts and share our ideas. So I'm going to post the link into your chat so that in case you haven't had an opportunity to sign up for Miro yet, you can go ahead and sign up for an account. It's free, and then you can access the group board that we'll be working through. At the end of this presentation, we'll be providing a brief orientation to how to use Miro so that we all get familiar with it. And I think you'll find that it's pretty straightforward. So without much further ado, I'm thrilled to give it away to Katya, Mariana, and Mani.
Thank you, Dasha. And we're going to tell you what you can expect today. You will hear some of our personal stories and our professional paths. Where do we find ourselves now? Then, as Dasha mentioned, we will break into rooms to have a little bit of more intimate conversation. And then we will come back as a group and share out the stories and have some closing statements. Next. But we're not sharing 3 stories today. This is one story and how we met and discover how stronger we are together. We met at the intersection of women and architecture when we were all in our mid-career profession. And 4.5 years later, we find ourselves not alone in search for an anchored network to sustain our path as women who design. So we're not alone. This session will explore different ways to build that anchored network and to create transformative and diverse designers. I think we Dasha touched a little bit, on this, but we are all in charge of our own thoughts, and we are our own personality. Independence and self-awareness is also known to be linked to confidence. And by knowing who you are and what you stand for in life, it can give you a strong sense of self-confidence in order to be yourself and have, to know yourself. Next. I was born in Mexico, and I think because of all the news, everybody knows where Mexico is, but there are more countries south of the border. I promise, not every single country south of the border, it's Mexico. Next. And what it means to grow up in Mexico is that it's a great cosmopolitan city. It's rich in culture, and it has a great link to design, since they all make us in this 1500s BC. Next. But also Mexico is a place where everything that you do is with other people. Since you are born, most people are surrounded by others, particularly women. That makes, and women make the calls inside and outside of your house. It's your mother, your grandmother, sisters, aunts, cousins, they all know your life, your ups and downs, and they share, and there's no place to escape. I was born there, and even in the United States, even if I wanted to, they still know everything that I do. Next. And then I moved and started studying architecture in Mexico. And all of my role models and my anchor network were actually males. I was exposed to, high quality design. Legorreta used to come to my school to give lectures, having, exposure to an Enrique Norton that has done an amazing work in Mexico and the United States and throughout Latin America. But they were all male leaders. They were all male figures. And this started to shape a little bit of what I thought, would be a good designer, what I thought it would be, a good model. Next. So I had always been an overachiever. I'm the one that had the best grades, honor classes in high school, elementary school. And I thought, well, that's the way to be successful. And that's the way that also those male role models, were in my mind being successful. Next. But very soon I found that design was not a meritocracy. If you're talented and work hard, you will succeed. It was a statement that I sometimes question if it was truth or if it was a myth. Next. And I started to question what that greatness meant to me. It was not what others thought, it was not what I thought it was. And was it measured, by the projects that we win, of the awards we win? Next. Or was my own greatness reflected in the art that I was making or the buildings that I was designing? Next. Or even more in depth, was it just that greatness and that sense of accomplishment was based on the people, and how people reacted to what I was doing, to who I was, and the buildings that I was designing? By the way, I made a plug for a great book. All my friends have issues, and I took it's a great book to start as you start forming, your own network. Next. So in this question, to try and to understand what greatness was to me, what I was, I found myself in a constant conversation, with myself, and introspection about the duality of my limitations and my strengths. Limitations and weaknesses often cause us to see us, as inadequate. And strengths with those limitations are actually what define our personality, that yin and yang. So we don't have one without the other. While we might see our limitations as imperfections, we have to be aware of those in order to enable us to balance them in appropriate manner. And too often we're not aware of the true capacity that we have until we understand what that duality is. Next. And there was also then the duality of the independence and building that self-confidence that I talked at the beginning, versus needing, versus needing the validation of others in order to feel good. So through introspection, and as I said, a lot of out loud conversations with myself, but also with friends, colleagues, and mentors, I discovered that the designs and even the art that I was doing was more meaningful when I was working with others to achieve a goal. It was not on the opinion of others, it was more on the network around myself that provided that support and validation. And it was when I discovered that for me, the power of working with others, sharing my experiences with others, and collaborating with others that made me feel that greatness that I was searching for. Next. I love this quote from MLK. Everything that we see is a shadow cast by which we don't see. This quote to me describes how observable human behavior is, and is a direct reflection of the nuances that make up our internal beings. How we think, our core values, what motivates us, and to me, how do we design? Next. So the power of working for others transformed me into being a better designer. I was able to see other points of views, and it was very inspiring when I actually went back into these buildings and saw how others enjoy a building. That made me understand that piece of greatness. Next. So there's not one path to discover the duality, of your strengths and weaknesses. For me, it was through, again, those long conversations, a lot of reading, sometimes just having a glass of wine and talking to others, that I discovered my own way of being great. Next. So don't forget to engage in that personal reach. This is not a one-time search. It's something that you can do throughout your entire career, and it's continuous, and in my mind, it has to be relentless. Find yourself inside that duality of art, and architecture, and design. Why painting or grabbing a marker and a notepad and sketching a building feels good, and understanding that is going to help you along your way. What is it that you're trying to achieve? Our lives, I think that they are a little bit of a design problem. What is your ultimate goal? How you're going to work with different stakeholders, and yes, stakeholders are the other people in your life, including yourself, and find that ultimate design outcome in order to realize that goal. Again, it's never too late to know yourself better. Mani?
Thank you, Katya. So I'm going to be continuing in the story. As Katya mentioned, we aren't really three stories. It's sort of all continuation of the same story. And you'll see similar themes that we'll talk about in terms of duality, finding our voice, and using our network and connections. So I'm going to take you on this journey around the world to the other side of the planet, to the Middle East, to Iran, just where I'm from, to sort of talk further about that balance, that transformation. So my name is Mani Helen Ardalan Farhadi. I'm Iranian American. I am Muslim. I'm a woman. Some might say that's a triple minority. But my story is your story too. I want you to think about yourself as I'm telling you my story. Because how many of you find yourself at an intersection? Perhaps you're between races, between religion, ethnicity, gender, between languages. So whether culturally or professionally, you might think that there are some hindrances that are holding you back, but I'm here to tell you what you think of as a limitation can actually be your strength. And for myself, I've thought about my hybrid identity. As Katya said, talking to myself, I was doing a similar thing. And I came to the conclusion that I prefer to move seamlessly between that multiplicity. And I'm happy to share with you a poem that I wrote about. It's called Fluidity. I take thee, fluidity. Why choose sides? Why must we abide with antiquated ways in complicated days? I define anew with my own view. Who am I? And then ask why. If it must be, I take thee, fluidity. Pick one or the other. Why must I bother? When one is single and I am dual, both east and west, picking what's best. both city and rural, because I am plural. If it must be, I take thee, fluidity. The land of Iran, from which I've run, rich with tradition, full of rendition, to American soil, where I now toil, living the dream of life between. If it must be, I take thee, fluidity. That's one of our Persian heritages, is telling poetry. So although mine is in English, it comes from a heritage of a culture that is rich in poems. So what's my story? My Iranian grandfather, who was inspired by a missionary, began high school at age 35. He came to Ellis Island about 100 years ago at the age of 50 to start medical school. He had no money, and yet somehow he worked hard and graduated from Syracuse and became the first Iranian physician in the United States. At Harlem Hospital, because that's the only place that would hire a barbarian from another country, he met my American grandmother, Helen. She was a nurse, and she had moved to New York from Idaho. So he used to tell her stories. His name was Abul Bassem. He would tell her stories. He would read her poetry from Iran, and they fell in love. So we say the blonde and the barbarian married, and therefore began our hybrid heritage, making me American by blood. My parents were born in Iran, but they were raised in America, and that is where they met. They were more Western than they were Eastern, and that's how I came to be born in San Francisco, making me American by birth. But then my family did a reverse migration, and we journeyed back to Iran to rediscover our heritage. So I grew up in Iran, literally at the intersection, multilingual, bicultural, interfaith from the very beginning, and I attended an international school led by missionaries. During childhood, my parents were involved in the international architecture scene of Iran, and we drove throughout the countryside exploring the history. They researched the symbolism and the meaning behind the traditional architecture of Iran. My father, Nader Ardalan, my mother, Lale Bakhtiar, wrote a book together, The Sense of Unity, Sufi Tradition in Persian Architecture. My father worked with Louis Kahn and invited him to Iran, and they collaborated together on designing a new city. My mother then wrote Sufi, Expressions of the Mystic Quest, which is about the mystical journey of life. Then my mom took me with her to attend the International Congress of Women Architects. She had just gotten divorced, and I had just become a teenager. The conference was called The Crisis of Identity in Architecture. It was held in Iran in 1976, and that topic resonated with both of us. So as a kid, I met Denise Scott Brown, Ann Ting, along with Alison Smithson, Jane Drew, and other famous women architects from around the world. Now, although I'd seen my father as an architect, it wasn't until I saw these women architects that I thought I could be an architect. There they were talking in the 70s about creating equitable societies, promoting sustainability and vernacular architecture, and giving voice to women, much like we're still talking about today. I felt a camaraderie between them. They came together and the call to action to make changes in the built environment. So thanks to my beautiful mom, this heavily influenced me, not only in my career choice, but in the type of relationships I wanted to have. And I dreamed of someday recreating and participating in such a conference. And guess what? Now we're planning one for 2022. We're expecting about 1,000 women at the conference. So back in Iran, we were drastically challenged by the Iranian Revolution. Some of you may know about it, some of you may not. But they were biased there against Americans. Americans were taken hostage, and we feared being discovered as US citizens. So we came to America. In America, they were now prejudiced against Iranians, with signs wanting to have us deported. So am I supposed to deny my place of birth, my ancestors, my heritage, looking Iranian on the outside, being American on the inside? At first, it was very scary. I was anxious, I was doubtful. But my sociology professor told me, look people in the eye. You tell them where you're from. How else are you going to change their mind? And his words really transformed me. If I hadn't experienced the bias of being Iranian American, I wouldn't be who I am today. It made me want to stand up to eliminate prejudice. So similarly in the architecture industry, I've been working for more than 30 years in architecture, yet only as an associate member of AIA, non-licensed, straddling that space in between. By realizing, though, that I had strengths and reinventing myself, I decided to bring about change in the industry by advocating and being inclusive and eliminating stereotypes. You can't deny your heritage and your culture. And you yourself might be going through an internal struggle, trying to decide whether to blend in, whether to stand out. How do you balance speaking up with fitting in? So for me, I've developed a menu approach. I take parts that resonate with me and I create my own definition. I take what I feel comfortable with from the East, such as respect for the community. I take what I admire about the West, such as spirit of independence. And building upon my hyphenated identity, I welcome this duality. I have two sources to draw upon. So as a leader, we also face duality between being strong, confident, assertive, while our Eastern upbringing has trained us to be respectful, friendly, accommodating. So culturally, the tribe is more valued than the individual. The community matters more than the solo. And I say, find the talents that you're strong in, overcome the skills that you might be weaker in. As a consensus builder, I have an ability for community engagement. Why is that? Because I've been raised literally by a tribe and the importance of listening to elders. As a campus planner, education programmer, I advocate for the end user out of respect for them versus thinking about what I might personally want. So being in a group, we have the power to overcome adversity. Through our networks, we lift each other up, as you'll hear us talk about. The relationships such as WIA, Equity by Design, WWD, those nurture me. Together, we are stronger and we can go farther. And in fact, my WIA circle helped me navigate my career change because through WIA, I was able to ask my network, what is the director's salary at their firm? And that information helped me gain a 40% increase to my previous salary. Also in my community, I volunteered for my school district, and that brought me full circle because I brought together my professional work in architecture on school projects while also being there as a mother for my kids. I received the Citizen Architect Award from the AIA. I got the architect in there. Subsequently, I was appointed as a school board member, and it was a tremendous leadership opportunity, a chance to give back. I ran a campaign door to door. I was proud to be on the ballot, the first Iranian American on the ballot in our town. Now, I didn't win the votes, but I won for representing and for standing up. With consciousness of social justice, I use social media to promote equity and advocacy. And in my professional network, I mentor and coach other architects. I co-founded the group BB, Banu's in the Building Industry, just for Iranian Americans. Now, putting all that together, my education, projects, my planning background, my voice of diversity, I began looking for alignment at work. You too can find a firm, an organization whose mission and vision you believe in, where you resonate. Now I'm working in a very diverse environment at Stanford. I feel at home in the multicultural aspect, like a mini United Nations. Our group of Office of Facilities, we're about 50 people, 60% women, 40% men. Less than 50% are white, about a third are Asian, South Asian, and we also have African American. We have Middle East, North African, Hispanic, and mixed races. So what if we could turn the tables and make architecture firms more diverse? What if we could bring all these perspectives to bear? So last thing I would like to do is share with you an example of how diversity can enrich design. There is a philosophic and spiritual aspect of Persian design, the concept of the hidden and the manifest. So the Paradise Garden was born from a land that was dry and arid. There we had to create an oasis resembling paradise. Now you can be inside that garden looking out at the beauty of the fountains and the trees and the flowers and see the greatness of the outer world, the manifest. But you can also be standing in the garden looking internally into your soul to see the beauty within. That's the hidden. And when you're designing, think about that impact of what is seen outwardly, what is seen inwardly. Think about the public space and the private space from the eyes of the beholder. We've got to use our voice to rethink, to add value, to redefine. So in conclusion, some of my thoughts that I've shared with you is to embrace your heritage, define your identity, serve as an ambassador. You can change the dynamics, and that's what I strive to do. When you encounter prejudice, you find strength in embracing your heritage and embracing your choices. So for me, I take both East and West. I take the fluidity. Thank you. I'll now turn it over to Mariana.
Thank you, Mani. So I'm sure that many of you, after hearing Katya and Mani's stories, you relate to that in part or in its totality. And that's why we decided for this last part of the presentation, where we want to emphasize finding your voice, we're basing it with a graph about a career path. And we chose my path, but not because we wanted to talk a lot about me, but because of the surprisingly commonalities there are in the path of many women in architecture and design. So finding your voice, let me tell you a little bit about me. I'm originally from Argentina, so going back to the map, there it is. Now we are in South America. I was born and raised in Buenos Aires. There's where I got my degree in architecture and urbanism. And I'm pleased that one of my very close friends is joining us today, so I'm very excited. Let's go to the first part of the chart. You'll see on this chart, the horizontal line is symbolizing timeline. The vertical is symbolizing how great I feel in each path. And this is, you know, from going to amazing to great, and that is more, you know, my sense of fulfillment and feeling that I'm growing and that I'm learning. That is not always perfect, of course, that's life, but I wanted to show that again because of the commonalities that we all have in pinch points throughout our career. And then the black dotted line is actually showing the growth, the professional growth. So this is the first part of my career, and as you can see, there were two amazing moments. When I graduated, I liked what I was doing. I felt that this is where I needed to be. I worked for 4 years in Buenos Aires, and then I had the opportunity to move to the US. I found a job in Silicon Valley, California, and it was great. But I faced this first part of my career as many women do, with a predominant sense of control over our careers. We feel that what we've done in college and being achievers, as Katja has said, getting great grades, working hard, is going to give us those A grades in the workplace. And soon after that, we realize that the workplace is a different environment. That's not the case, right? But we still feel that we can do it. We also feel that we can do it ourselves. If we are exposed to some examples of inequality, we don't see them as affecting us. We kind of feel immune because, again, we have this strong sense of achievement and we can do this. And, you know, again, you soon realize that there are norms, cultural norms, and this is universal. It's happening everywhere. It's happening in Argentina. It's happening here. It's happening in Europe, where the culture, oh, Manny, we lost the presentation mode.
How about
There
now?
it is. There it is. All right. So it's a perfect way to continue. So what I was saying is that, you know, even though we have that sense of control and that we can do it all and that we can do it ourselves, then the norms, the culture starts to make you feel like that's not the case. So you start doubting yourself. You say, okay, I need to slow down and observe and fit in. Right, and here's where we confuse fitting in to belonging. Manny talked a little bit about belonging, but in the first part of the career, then you're really trying to observe and see how leaders act, to, you know, and try to mimic, because you see that that's the way of growing. If we continue then to what happened to me in this path, you can see that, well, from amazing, I went down to I can't complain. Then I'm like, well, I'm okay. And now I am not okay. And the growth in the career is stagnant, right? It stopped going up. And that is because when we're trying to fit in, we grow away from our values, we grow away from our beliefs, and we start, you know, it happened to me where I was mostly silent in meetings and observing, because I was in this learning mode of I need to fit in. So the importance is to be able to break the silence and, again, find your voice in those situations. So luckily I had a point, and there's one meeting where I was able to voice my opinions on issues that I was seeing in a design of a project. This meeting, there were 10 to 12 people in the meeting, and there were several seniors talking with a very commanding voice, but the rest of the people were not saying anything about the issues. So my first reaction was, I'm wrong. I'm sure I'm not seeing the whole picture. I'm sure I am wrong. And I think that that's what many women go through, right? Because again, the norms are making, you know, they chip into your confidence, and you're not seeing, you know, being able to do that. Anyway, in the end of that meeting, I was able to say what I thought. I even started with an apologetic voice, another thing that's very common in women. How many of you start a comment saying, I'm sorry, I think this should be this way? Big mistake, don't do that, right? So it worked, and that's the important thing about finding the voice. You know, luckily they did take my comments into account, and we were able to keep the basis of design that my team, you know, and I had been working on. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to see then for this first part of the career, what are the barriers? And these are the invisible barriers. First of all, those conditioned expectations that you think that, again, everything you've done in college will work and it will make you succeed. There's denial, because we you know, these norms are so ingrained in the culture that you don't see them as something affecting you. It's just a common acceptance because nobody's picking up, right? And you're in this denial that, you know, if you do see something, it's not going to happen to you. You conform to fit in. And then obviously to make up for that, we overperform, right? We work long hours. We need to prove ourselves. What happens to the design? Well, it suffers because we're holding back. Until I found that voice and I dared to interrupt and talk to seniors, challenging a little bit what they were saying, I was sweating in that meeting, and I thought I was committing career suicide, but it worked, and we don't need to be feeling that. And then the next thing is about network, right? Because we are in this state that we believe that we got this, because we're coming fresh from all the success that we had when we were in school, we're not reaching out as much to a network. When I first moved to the US, I tried to go into the networking events from AIA, American Institute of Architects, but I wasn't feeling identified. I would go to these events, I wouldn't relate to people, so like, you know, why bother? It wasn't happening. So let's see what else happened in the chart. In the second part of the chart then, as I was still trying to do more and realizing that, as Katya said, it wasn't a system by merit, that if I worked hard and I did the right things, I was actually advancing. I realized that that wasn't happening. I still said, okay, I'll just keep working hard until, you know, somebody sees me. But my career was stagnant. We're still in this horizontal line in the middle of the chart. Then I became a mother, and as you can see, this was off the charts. It's an amazing feeling, but as soon as I went up, I went deep down into the blues, thinking that I lost my identity, that I wasn't an architect anymore, that I had lost my profession. So I had a very tough time being a mom, and I was desperate to go back to work, to prove that I could do both things. But there is another norm, again, very known, that, you know, it feels like when women become mothers, they're kind of betraying the role of an ideal worker, right? Because you're not staying long hours anymore, because you're leaving to go to pick up your daughter at daycare. And there are those certain norms that then, you know, it's still chipping away also on your confidence and your performance, but you're still putting all you can and doing a lot. So that comes to the next question, which is the glass ceilings. Are these imposed? Are they self-created? I think they're both. In my case, because of my upbringing, I had that feeling of I cannot be a great you know, an ideal worker, because I have all these things going on right now, but I was seeing how productive I was. It's proven how mothers are very productive and straight to the point and performing much better than people that are not parents. But at the same time, there are those imposed glass ceilings, because you know, even women that are able to negotiate a part-time so that they can take care of their infants, the part-time, it's seen as a benefit, as something else. So why would you ask for more? Would you ask for a promotion? You know, why are you so needy wanting more when you already have this benefit? If there is a silver lining to the pandemic, I think it has helped everybody exposed how much mothers are doing. So now part-time work or flexible hours has been understood in a very much stronger way in this past year. But basically that's what happens, right? So when I went back to work, I went with this sense of, I need to prove myself. I need to prove that even though I have all these things going on, I'm still gonna do. I studied through licensure. I did change jobs, so that's why I had my charts going up to feeling cool. Like that first part of the job, you have a lot of also new goals and a little bit of advancement there. I became a U.S. citizen, but again, this feeling of not being an ideal worker and chipping away my confidence, there is another norm, very common, that confidence is perceived as competence. Okay, that is why we have a lot. I've seen a lot of examples of male colleagues advancing and being perceived as competent because they're very strong and they're very confident. Women are less confident, and that is associated with our competence. So I found myself, a quick example, during this time that we were working on the design of a layout for very conceptual design, and the president of the firm said, "This is how we're going to do it," and I actually expressed in my soft voice, not commanding, what I thought, and I was interrupted and said, no, we're gonna do it this way. Please go back and draw it so that we have it tomorrow by 10. I could see my supervisor looking at me and wanting to learn more about what I was suggesting, but he didn't speak up, right? So I went to my desk. I worked on that concept. It was 7 p.m. and I decided to stay the night at work. I called my husband and say night-night to my daughter on the phone, and I said, I'm going to stay working. And I worked overnight on developing the concept that I wanted to share because I couldn't do it in words. I decided to do it in paper. The next day by 10 a.m., the president of the firm had two options, the one he wanted and the one that I had. What did I get? An email, which I still have, that said, Mariana, contrary to what I thought, this concept really works and this is the way we need to go. Great job. So was that a win? Yes, I'm very proud of that moment. But now I know I should have done more. I should have had to go to the supervisor and ask him, next time, speak up and support women that may not be that commanding, but they have a lot to show and to design. And because that then sets it is in a way of educating, managers and people at the top how to support and hear up people that, might be more shy. So barriers of that. Oh, so sorry, Vani, go back one more time. So apart from that example, I kept going. I worked through the licensing, having 2 kids now. But again, as you can see, the question mark, right? Okay, I'm achieving all these things. I have licensure, and I was still not advancing. And I went down to a spot where I was totally not okay. There was no fulfillment, no challenge, no motivation. And again, this sense of no matter what I did, the system was not ready for me to advance, right? So let's go to those barriers, right? So what happens during this second middle part of women's career? There's this role conflict of the ideal worker versus the ideal woman. And the issues that the career being at a stall is not just for motherhood. There's women that decide not to be mothers, but still they're perceived as less, or still are perceived as less competent because their confidence is not, or their voice is not as commanding. And we pay the performance tax. We do double. We overperform to prove ourselves constantly, and that's exhausting. So what happens to design? Design suffers because we don't sound confident enough, right? Which is perceived, as I said, as competence, and then it's not happening. What about networking? In this time, we're just juggling through much. whether we are, you know, balancing life, you know, with kids and work, or because we're overperforming to prove ourselves and that's eating up all our time, we don't dedicate as much time to find, you know, that connection. So that brings us to the last part of the path, where I actually, when feeling that totally not okay, I joined Women in Architecture at Silicon Valley chapter. And immediately the jump from being not okay to already feeling good, because I felt like-minded people and I found a platform where I could say my ideals without being judged and without any those minor aggressions or norms that are holding us back. We created a lot of events where I was finding my true self. So in the next slide, you know, it's representative of, you know, what I was feeling there. I jumped onto a Stanford program. I embraced my heritage, as Manny was talking about, and what I was bringing to the table by having grown in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I started goofing around and having funny pictures when I could go to you know, make a trip with my kids and being my true self, right? And we created so many events because we experimented and we uncovered talents and things that I could do that otherwise alone I couldn't have done it. So the last part of the chart, which is represented in red here, is how amazing I felt because I regained my confidence. I was reminded of my talents, because sometimes, you know, when there's one thing that goes wrong, that's what lingers in your mind, regardless of the other 10 that are great about you. Having a network of women that go through the same or are learning from your experiences, it just reminds you, you have done so much, you can do that. And I had people saying, Mariana, there's nothing that you cannot do. And I was like, no, totally, I cannot do that. But they give you that force and that confidence, and it's reflected on my career path as well. So it's a personal and a professional growth that you can take. It's invaluable from being in a network of women. However, once you're in leadership, barriers are still there. And one of the barriers that I experienced a couple of years ago is, you know, in leadership, you're having difficult conversations. And as usual, I went and overstudied and over-prepared for a meeting. And when I asked tough questions, the response was, who are you consulting that's giving you these questions? They didn't dare to think I knew it were coming from me. So we still deal with barriers. You know, inequality doesn't stop, it doesn't expire, it's still there, and it's because of the cultural norms that are out there. But what is amazing about women in leadership, and I know a lot because of the network, is that despite of battling these barriers, we have a strong sense of giving back. We enjoy doing these sessions, we enjoy doing mentoring to change the status quo and advance the next generation. So the last slide, Manny, again, in this third part of, you know, when women are in leadership, you know, we're dealing with stereotypes. I didn't mention that, right? So if you're in leadership, but if you sound too commanding, then you're aggressive or you're too ambitious. So we need to be kind, but if we are kind, we sound weak. So if we sound weak, you know, we're not leaders. And this, by the way, is hurting men as well. It's not just women, right? So if men are in these careers showing a little bit of sensitivities or being, you know, empathic with the way they're working, they're seen also as weak. So they're suffering from these norms as well. Another thing that being in leadership is that value self-assessment and legitimacy. It's an exercise that you go inside. When you're in leadership, you're not creating and drafting and managing projects as you used to. So you have that internal questioning of, am I really contributing as much as I used to? And that is the external, right? There's people that when they see women promoted to leadership, you know, some companies do it just to check the diversity box, but they really don't think that they deserve it. Or other people are asking, what did she do to get there? Not thinking that it was deserved. So there's a lot of things still happening. Now in design, we feel we can contribute because we can have a stronger voice still, but while navigating that. but the networking is critical. That's where I discovered, and that's what we are encouraging everybody to do from the very beginning. So, conclusion about finding your voice, trust it. You have who you are where you are because you're prepared and you deserve it. So trust your voice, raise awareness, and, as I said before, don't let bystanders keep having this language conversation that are making this normal, right? When there are those little comments such as, oh, please bring coffee. Like, you can bring it too, right? So we need to raise awareness and speak up, right? Be your whole self. Have a network of again, like-minded people that can remind you that your whole self, your true self, is the best one to bring at work. And if you keep finding, don't give up in looking for a network. As I mentioned at the beginning, I tried to network with AIA, and at that time I didn't find my place. I gave up because it wasn't that first part that I thought that, oh, I can do this by myself. Don't give up. Keep looking until you find a group where you can connect and feel stronger. All right. So with that, talking about goofing, yes, we did goof in front of the AIA sign, and we all, are stronger. I think I went way past my time, but we are gonna now break into rooms so that we can hear a little more of other stories and brainstorm about things that we can do to detect and navigate these barriers, many of them invisible barriers. And we're going to do a quick orientation of how to use Miro. I'm going to give the opportunity to Dasha to show this. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Wow, those were, yeah, 3 incredible stories. Let's all give a hand to our presenters. Thank you so much for sharing those. It's incredible how simultaneously vulnerable and powerful those stories are. So before we break out into breakout rooms, I want to give everybody a little bit of an introduction to this tool that we're going to be using to think through our own careers and think about how our networks can help us advance.
I think it would be great for a closeout. I volunteered a volunteer to speak for room 2, but Katya, do you want to talk about room 1, or do you have someone to speak for it?
Mariam, can I ask you to do a quick recap of our group?
Sure. So we talked about the experience, the whole group. We agreed we need to empower each other. We need to understand what we are talking about. And as Wendy mentioned, to be creative, to make new things. She mentioned that they started OWA 50 years ago. We started Women Who Design 2 years ago, just to start to open a window to rest of our colleagues and to rest of the female in this field. And then about the story, what is your story? It was mainly to talk and to listen to other, one of our participants, she talked about she's a new mom and how she has been through the last couple of months in her office. So I think at the end, we were, the whole idea was the pledge out of this was to contribute, to listen, to find the unique voice, and to embrace any conflict.
Thank you. How about room 2?
Great. We certainly spent a good amount of time talking about, our experience, and I think in all, we all had, things to overcome, the shyness, the, just, being the first, and only kind of doing, whatever that, position or role is, being unclear about your role, being careful and calculated, in those situations, in some cases is, was about seizing the opportunity. I think in their contributions with our story, we didn't get to it and talk about it in detail, but I do, see some notes that it's, it's about building confidence in the profession and, continuing to carve paths in leadership. I think what is very amazing is to see, some of the attributes that we could, continue to explore in this network is, promoting diverse opinions, being a cheerleader for each other. There's more we can do, right? The brainstorming together, finding the hidden talents, and focusing on our strengths. And then lastly, just the pledge to ourselves, they're really beautiful in terms of never giving up, speaking up for each other, being good listeners, not getting angry, and standing up for each other. That's all.
Thank you, Claudia.
Mariana, you're last.
Yes. So our group, we were actually group 3, and we did it in a little bit reverse order in the group numbers. But Neela, did you want to recap?
I can say, and then you can add on it.
Mm-hmm, sure.
I think our group felt that they had diverse groups, so we had different languages, people were from different countries, and people had many different experiences of different disciplines. So they all felt that they are resilient, they want to grow, and their experience, but still because it's not having enough connections or something, it felt like their strengths are not directed towards their growth. So I think so the connection is very important. That's what I felt from their different advice from the group. Feedback or support is the pledge we got it. But anyway, so yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Neela. I think that our group, I don't know how the others were, really emotional responses from people, and I love that people felt so comfortable in our group to speak up. I mean, it was really pretty emotional. So I'm glad that I was able to provide a safe space so that some of you women who are struggling with confidence could feel comfortable to share. And I hope that we bolstered you to feel, that you can speak up, and that it's okay. And it takes steps, little steps. So most people pledged to speak up, to reach out, to, work on having a more active voice. And I would say one thing to help you is to visualize yourself on that other side. So visualize that you have taken that step. You did speak up at the next meeting. You already did reach out to someone. So if you picture yourself on the other side of it, it just gives you a visual that you've already done it and you're there. And that might help you to achieve that. And
don't do it alone. Ask for help before you need the help, because you're going to be surprised how many people are willing to help. It's amazing. So one thing that we didn't mention, for those who are architects and wants the continued education units, there's a portion of the board at the very bottom where you can you can put your name and AIA number, and we'll report this to the local chapter so that you're given the credits. Well, thank you very much. Laura, do you want to close, or Miriam?
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining us on a Sunday morning to talk about this. I think that all of the stories that we heard today were incredibly inspiring, and it's a great launch to our exhibit that's going to share many more stories about women in our field. So I thank everybody for joining us, and I cannot wait to see more of this in the future.